Welcome to Extropy on Air, the podcast from Extropy Advisors, where we dive into the world of AI, digital transformation, and the future of business. Each episode will bring you perspective from leaders, innovators, and experts across industries, all focused on helping organizations and, more importantly, people thrive in a changing world. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome back to Extropy on Air. I'm Kevin Zirkle with Extropy Advisors, and today we're focusing on one of the most overlooked, yet most powerful levers in finance transformation, and that is source to pay, otherwise known as S2P in the space. It's a space that's absolutely riddled with friction, policy violations, maverick spend, supplier frustration, compliance risk. They're often dismissed as the cost of doing business, but they don't have to be. So we've got an exciting episode today, and actually joining me is John Purcell from Esker. John, let's talk about why Esker is really changing the conversation around source to pay.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Source to pay, I think it's historically been viewed as back office plumbing, right? But in today's environment, it's become more of a strategic differentiator. It's where cash control, supplier health, and operational agility really come together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, John. So why don't we just start? Let's start really diagnosing the pain. From your perspective, why do you think so many companies are still struggling with the source to pay process, even though companies have been buying forever, it seems like?
Now, Kevin, I think there are a few root causes. To start, there's some silos between different functions, between sourcing, procurement, and AP in source to pay processes. I think expanding on that, there's a lack of real-time visibility into your business spend or your liabilities. And then, of course, there's manual processes, manual invoice entry, paper approvals that really bog down the gears of the operation as well. And then that leads to inconsistent policy enforcement when you don't have time to really apply the policies as you need to. And then there's also poor supplier communication or the ability to track your disputes with your suppliers to resolve them correctly. Ultimately, without a connected platform, companies end up reacting instead of managing, and that leads to delays, leakages, and compliance risks.
It's funny to hear you talk about paper. It's amazing today. We still have so much paper in these organizations. And I mean, we find that the bigger the organization, oftentimes the more fragmented this becomes. I mean, especially when you start dealing with multiple geographies, multiple ERPs, these huge supplier ecosystems, it really becomes a daunting task. So let's talk specifically about Esker. What does Esker do really to solve this differently?
Well, Esker is going to connect the full source to pay process from your request to reconciling your payments, all on a single platform. So here's what that looks like. Start with e-sourcing. You're going to be able to find new vendors, run e-auctions, RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, all those with scoring and event weighting. So your sourcing is shored up and running really well. Then you have requisition management. So as your users request goods and services, you're going to guide them on their buying so that they make the paths to the things you want them to buy. Then we have PO creation and approvals. So you have configurable workflows to enforce those policies I talked about earlier, so you don't have bottlenecks. We also would have good receipt tracking. So that will help you validate the three-way match automatically. And then into invoice automation. So Esker is going to capture, validate, and match those invoices with no manual touch points. And I think a great thing as well is the supplier self-service. Vendors can check statuses, submit documents, and resolve issues directly in the Esker platform. The end result is a frictionless flow of information, reduced manual intervention, and enhanced compliance.
Yeah, I think that frictionless word, that's it's a hard word to say, but it's really important. And that really is huge. I mean, especially for companies with, thousands of suppliers and a lot of these decentralized operations. One of the things that we hear a lot from our customers is, this source to pay space, it's crowded with a lot of noise. It's really hard to differentiate from a competitive standpoint. Let's kind of dive a little bit into that competitive context. I mean, what does Esker's source to pay solution, how does it stack up against with others in the industry today?
Yeah, let's take a look, right? You have some of these solutions that I think you have trade-offs. Some will be very strong in specific areas like invoice capture or matching. Some are stronger in procurement workflows and really lead with procurement. But then they often come with trade-offs, rigid processes, limited flexibility to make changes without IT or professional services involvement. And a lot of them have higher costs to implement, higher costs of licenses, and they can't really scale. They're not complex enough to scale as well. Then you have ERP add-ons. So these are going to be typically focused on compliance rather than usability. They're slower to evolve. They're not built for the modern user or supplier experiences, right? We've all been in these ERPs. And they can fall short when it comes to enabling collaboration or, more importantly, automation. Esker stands out because it's modular and scalable. You can start with invoice automation and expand into procurement, and it can fit seamlessly into businesses of any size, from mid-market to global enterprise. Is business user-friendly? Finance and procurement can own the platform really without leaning on IT. And it brings suppliers into the fold, not just your internal users.
Yeah, I think that's big. I mean, that really is a key. A lot of the things you talked about, I mean, they just speak to me about flexibility without fragility in the operations. I think being able to control without cost creep that might exist with other applications. That's a great overview of the platform there. One of the other things I wanted to touch on in this section is really looking at things from a supplier side perspective. You know, a lot of platforms in the market, they really forget that anytime we're in sourcing and procurement, that means somebody else is selling something to us. So what does Esker do to deliver here on the supplier side?
Yeah, we include a supplier portal, right? And that's what brings those suppliers into the fold. And that supplier portal is going to gives them the ability to track their invoices, their PO statuses, resolve disputes, right? And have workflows for that. They can upload documents, W-9s, banking info, things like that. And then I think also an important thing to note is it's going to have a history of the communication, everything that's been sent back and forth between the supplier and the customer. This dramatically reduces the volume of, hey, where's my payment, emails or phone calls? More importantly, it builds trust and loyalty. Suppliers appreciate being treated like partners, I'd say, more than problems.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. You hear a lot of supplier complaints. Very few companies look at suppliers truly as that partner that you just mentioned. I know you know, when it's done properly, we've seen clients cut supplier inquiry volume by, gosh, 50, 60% just by giving vendors some visibility. And that is real cost. And just as importantly, it's morale improvement across the organization. So, you know, I'd love to get a little more specific about this. And we've asked a lot of the other Esker team members with other applications across the platform. You know, talk to us a little bit about the source to pay component. Can you give us an example of where you've seen this in action at a client account?
Yeah, sure. I think of one client we had was a national healthcare group with over 80 locations. And they were struggling with very manual processes for 40,000 invoices each year and inconsistent procurement across those 80 facilities. So after rolling out Esker's source to pay solution, 85% of their invoices became touchless. Payment cycle times improved by 40%. Complaints dropped as well by 75%. And ultimately, policy compliance rose from 48% to over 90%. Best of all, they avoided a full ERP migration. They were able to take Esker and overlay it on their systems to create a modern, unified user experience.
Yeah, those are some pretty impressive numbers there. And I actually like what you talked about there at the end. I mean, the ability to not have to go through what we call a rip and replace mandate for ERP or whatever it might be. I mean, that type of agility that you're talking about and the type of ROI that it delivers, I mean, those really are things that I think finance leaders are looking for. So appreciate you sharing that story with us. I'd love to get your thoughts about when Extropy is brought into the mix with Esker clients. I mean, being partner friendly, in my opinion, I think it's critical for any enterprise technology company. So how does Esker view these partnerships with respect to really delivering sustained results for customers?
Yeah, good question, Kevin. I think you help with things like policy redesign, helping customers understand what should be automated and why, guiding them on role-based access mapping as well. So approvals don't create bottlenecks. You help with supplier segmentation to enable different strategies for different types of suppliers. And then you also help track success metrics so leaders can adopt and track adoption. Overall, I think Extropy is the bridge between system capability and the business context that's so useful in projects like this. You make sure the system fits how people actually work, not just how it's configured in a sandbox.
I appreciate that. That's great insight. I mean, one of the things that we say a lot is so many organizations look at go live as really the end of any project. And from our perspective, with Esker and every other technology application that clients may be looking for, go live oftentimes is just the start. It's really about what we're able to do to help drive those success metrics moving forward. I think the things you mentioned are outstanding. We also help with defining a lot of thresholds for spend, helping companies understand approval logic, exception handling, really that reflect their real world decision making within their own firm. So I appreciate the partner friendliness from the Esker side around that. So, one of the things that we also hear a lot, John, is what's the executive case? I mean, when we're sitting and talking with CFOs or CPOs, we certainly understand what those lever points are. But from your perspective, why do you think CFOs and CPOs really care or should care so deeply about source to pay modernization?
Yeah, I think it comes down to source to pay impacts so much of the business. Cash flow and spend control, having visibility into compliance and audit readiness. Those are important to C-levels, CFOs, CPOs. Having that supplier resilience in your supply chain and also pricing power. And then when it comes internally, right, you want to have a team that's productive and is happy with what they're doing. So you have higher employee retention. In short, I think source to pay is a strategic control layer for the enterprise. Automating source to pay well, it's going to drive savings. It strengthens those vendor relationships and helps improve forecasting. And what CFO doesn't want that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I think you touched on three really important things. I mean, the concept of savings, trust, and at the end of the day, insight. I think you're dead on. So one of the things I've actually done with some of your other colleagues, John, I've talked about or given you the ability to kind of look into your crystal ball. So I'm gonna give you the same, particularly related to source to pay. Where do you see this all heading in, say, the next 2-3 years ahead of us?
Yeah, sure. I think a few trends we see to start: more and more AI integration for fraud detection, recommending policies, and that guided buying I talked about earlier. I think supplier experience as a KPI, a metric you're tracking. Leading companies will treat suppliers more like customers, I think. Sustainability metrics, that's top of mind as well, tracking scope 3 emissions via procurement data of what you're buying. And then this whole connected platform idea, integrating sourcing, contract lifecycle management, and payments into the mix as well for a cohesive ecosystem. Esker's investing heavily in these areas. And with Extropy's guidance, we're helping clients stay ahead of the curve.
That's awesome. That's our goal as well. And I'm gonna jot those down, John. And we're gonna come back and revisit these in another 2 or 3 years and see how close we got. So I know we're short on time today, so I think that's a great place to wrap it. Certainly want to thank you for spending some time with us today, showing how Esker is really modernizing that source to pay. And it's not just for efficiency, but really it's about empowerment for your organization. So I would just encourage any of our listeners, I mean, if your procurement and payables teams are still battling with spreadsheets and emails and policy exceptions, I mean, you really are going to want to rethink that strategy. So until next time, I want you guys to be sure to like, recommend, and certainly subscribe to Extropy on Air. Our Esker series is not done. The next time, we're actually going to dig a little bit deeper into that payable space. We're going to look at accounts payable automation and invoice processing, and we're going to explore how Esker is turning a traditional bottleneck into a very strategic business function. So until then, I want you guys to always remember we're always here to help you transform forward. John, appreciate you joining us today. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kevin.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to Extropy on Air. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode, and connect with us at Extropy Advisors to continue the conversation on AI and digital transformation. Until next time, I'm Kevin Zirkle, and this has been Extropy on Air.